Okay, welcome as people are joining us. Hello to everyone. Welcome. Just give me a minute. There's some more people coming in. Just take a minute to let everyone in. Okay, I think we have everyone in or about to join us.
Nice.
Do a quick check here. Oh, awesome. I think everyone is in. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lorene Oikawa. I'm president of the National Association of Japanese Canadians. First off, I would like to say that we are here with respect and gratitude for Indigenous peoples who are the traditional stewards of the lands and waters where we work and live. Myself, I am in the city of Surrey, which is the traditional and unceded territories of the Semiahmoo, Katsi, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikite, and Tawasan First Nations. And I know that we all acknowledge where we're calling in or zooming in from. And this is one way to acknowledge that we all are on a journey.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
Okay, and sorry, just the last sentence I was saying was that we recognize that we all are on a journey towards learning, listening, learning, and for reconciliation. So welcome everyone. And the National Association of Japanese Canadians is very pleased to be holding this event in association with the Powell Street Festival and the Landscapes of Injustice. I would like to welcome my co-host, Michael Abe, who is the project director for the Landscapes of Injustice. Worked really closely with Mike, and we've done these sessions before. And I know that personally, I got a lot out of it, finding out about my family, and we're here today to hear about some more families. So over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorene. Actually, project manager, got to check a lot of our actual project director next to me on the screen. Yeah, thanks very much, Lorene. And I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory I stand, and the University of Victoria as well, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continue to this day. And welcome to our community booth at this year's 45th annual Powell Street Festival. And thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to attending it live next year. So being involved with the Landscapes of Injustice research project since 2014, it's been really great to see the launch of all of our project outputs over the past year, including the Broken Promises Museum exhibit at the Nikkei National Museum, which just ended at the end of June. And we'll move on to the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto and be there from September to December of this year. And also saw the launch of the elementary and secondary school teacher resource websites, the digital storytelling website, and the book, Landscapes of Injustice, a new perspective on the internment and dispossession of Japanese Canadians. And so thank you to all of our research collective, our cluster leaders, the many research assistants in both phases, and the postdocs to make them all possible. As a third generation Japanese Canadian, I'm most excited and proud of the digital research database that was launched in March. And like this session today, we've partnered with the NAJC to hold a number of sessions to hear firsthand from community members and their experiences with the files contained in the database as they explore their heritage and family history. The database was initially intended to contain just the research acquired by the project, but a few years ago, project director Jordan Stanger-Ross worked with the Library and Archives Canada to come on as a partner on the project. And this has evolved into a wonderful relationship and led to the inclusion of some significant additions. So here to tell us a bit more about that is our brilliant project director, Jordan Stanger-Ross.
Thank you, Mike, our brilliant project manager. and works with me in the office and made this all possible. And thanks, Lorene, and to the NAJC for hosting this event, and to everyone for coming on a Friday evening, although I think we have some who are on Saturday morning in Japan. I didn't realize at the beginning of this project that the archive would be the kind of output that it's become. It seemed like due diligence within a research project to share all of our research materials, just in case subsequent researchers wanted to work in the area or to verify that what we claim to be analyzing could be seen there in the archives as well. But it was really members of the community and community-based researchers and Mike Abe who really conveyed how powerful these how powerful some of the LAC records could be. And there was an emphasis in those discussions, in particular of the case files of the custodian of enemy property, which were files created for every Japanese Canadian who owned property of any kind, which would be virtually anyone, because it's not only real estate, but any forms of property that people own, including furniture and clothing and so on. And at the time of the uprooting, the custodian was entrusted to safeguard all of that property for Japanese Canadians until their return, and of course instead ended up confiscating and forcing ultimately its sale. And when I came to understand what it might mean to make all of those case files, so for virtually every Japanese Canadian family available, I approached Library and Archives Canada about partnership. And we had just until that point been really users of the library like anybody else, coming in and digitizing materials. But this was a really large record group. And so I approached people at LAC and ended up in conversations with people like Johanna Smith, who's on the line here. Johanna, I'm going to start talking with you soon, so you should unmute, who's the Director General of Public Services at the library. So I guess, Johanna, when someone comes in and asks a question about a big record group like this and whether LAC could partner in digitizing it, that kind of thing comes to your desk, I suppose.
Yeah, we love getting involved in partnerships, but usually when a first request comes in for access to files, we sort of send people a traditional route. Just sort of stepping back for a sec, we're the National Library and the National Archives. We have vast collections. We have about 250 kilometers just of textual records, 20 million books, lots of photos, art, maps, electronic records. So it's very hard for us to enter into a deep relationship with anybody who's coming to look at our material. So yeah, like you and your project were happily doing your research as a typical researcher. And then things started to get a little more intense for us both, I think, as we went along.
So Johanna, when we started working, we realized that the case files were in reels, microfilm reels that I guess were filmed in the 1950s when they closed that office. And then because it was an office of government, they were sent to the Library and Archives of Canada. And then it seems that the library had already digitized them as part in connection with a project, or some of them, a Canadiana project. But only 10%, I think, of the records were open and available at that time. So how would it come to be that 10% of a big record group like that would be open and the rest would be closed to researchers?
It's pretty typical of government records because they're subject to access to information and privacy law. So we don't proactively necessarily go in and review and open the records. We wait until somebody requests to see them. So, or until they reach a certain age. So the portion that you had access to was the portion that had been open for whatever reason, but we had these other records behind the scene that we were opening as specific individuals or specific requests came in. I think we have, sort of innocently thought, oh, about half of them were open until you pointed out, no, there's much fewer, and there's a lot of interest and really valuable use in these records. So when that happens, we can do something we call block review, where we look at a whole record set and do a check to see if it can be opened in its entirety. But we do some of that proactively ourselves, but we certainly can do it when somebody comes along and says, hey, and pushes us a little bit and gets it to the top of the line, which was where we ended up going with you and your persistent conversations.
I have been called persistent before. So what type of consideration, when a request like that comes in, so someone says, we'd love for you to digitize, 500,000 pages of material and let us make it available to researchers and the public. So what type of considerations are brought to bear on that request?
Yeah, so we've tried to calculate how much of our collection is digitized. It's a little bit of a hard thing to make numerical because of all those different media, but we estimate like it's under 5%. We don't have a very big digitization budget to be doing it behind the scenes. We do it with projects like this. We sometimes users pay for a digital copy, and that's something then we can give to share with others. So we like it when a partnership comes along where we can look at what's the research value of the record. Is this going to be something that a lot of people will be interested in seeing? So we look at that kind of thing. We look at whether the access to information and privacy law can apply and can allow for the records to be open. We look at the condition of the records to make sure they're not going to be too harmed or they don't need a lot of conservation work. In this case, they were microfilms, so that's one of the easiest things to continue with the digitization, although I think we had some of the ledgers as well that may have been hard copy. And then we look at the metadata, and we don't necessarily commit to creating detailed metadata, but we want to make sure that we have sort of higher level descriptions so that we have a way to display the records on our website. But one of the fun things for us about this project was that your research project was going to be creating this super rich index, which is something that we rarely have the time to do on our own as custodial archivists. But when we can work with experts who have a real research need and they're going to bring this added value of this amazing index, we are very excited.
Yeah, it was great. That's right. So we were able to have research assistants create metadata for all of the files, and then we had long conversations within our project. We mostly relied upon archives to decide which records should be open to the public. So if an archive was willing to open it to the public in their own archive, then we would be willing to share it digitally as well. But we considered that there were differences between something that's available to an online search versus the kind of commitment required to come into the to the archive, and so we had debates, including with our community, discussions within the project, I should say. I don't think they rose to the level of debates, but discussions within our project, including with the community council. I see Vivian, the chair of our community council, is here, and across the whole project team. And we decided that the value of making these available to Japanese Canadian families in particular, but also to researchers, outweighed the risks of the information being available. But we had serious conversations about that. And we've been really rewarded. I think you'll get a sense, Johanna, during this session as well from the kind of impact that these files are having. And we've just gotten beautiful testimonials, and the opportunity to do events like this with the community has been wonderful. And we've had over 20,000 unique visits to the digital archive since we launched in March. And I think many of those people are looking for LAC records. Many of them looking for the custodian case file records that you digitized. And so it's been wonderful, really unexpected kind of level of interest in these materials, and a real service. So thanks so much for living with that persistence and seeing the value in it, and doing this work with us. And it's great to have you on the line today.
Thanks so much. It's so great for us to be able to connect with a community that has a deep interest in records that are not always capturing happy stories, but are really meaningful for what's there. And I'm so excited to be able to see the resonance and the impact that these records had on specific families. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Great.
Great, thank you very much, Jordan and Johanna. And also, please, Johanna, send our gratitude to Melanie Brown, who's been just fabulous to work with. So thank you so much to the Library Archives. And we're going to give a little bit of a demonstration of what's in there with Jordan, and then we'll go in, talk to some of the community members. We've got Tami Hirasawa and her family, and then Lorene will introduce Kevin Okabe, and we'll take question and answers at the end. And if somebody wants to share or investigate their records right online in front, with everyone present, that'd be great too. So we have a pretty exciting, I think, itinerary for you today. So Jordan, do you want to share your screen and maybe do
I will.
a few
Oh.
basic searches, and then some searches that are a little bit unique, that it was interesting for me to see the first time.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And you'll have to cut me out once you get an historian into the archival materials. That could go on forever. So make sure, right, we're ending this bit at 5:30 at 5:30, right? 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So here we are. You can make note if you wish, and folks can follow along if you have that capacity. Maybe Mike, if you want to put the archive URL there. I know some folks are on phones and stuff, so might not be able to, but this is the landing page for the archive. You can enter a search directly in here if you wish. I tend to go to the collections section myself, and this allows you to search all of the materials still, but it breaks it out, and many, I think, of the community members coming to this site are going to this collection here, which is part of that Library and Archives Canada collection, and it's those case files for individuals. So if I click browse, you can see we're just browsing by name here, and you know, there are many case files here, so a person could browse. I tend to do a lot of searching, and I think a lot of people were. If you're looking for a specific name, and I'll do a search on a name in a moment. But another thing you could do is look for a place from which that is mentioned in the files. So this will include any time that our research assistants have noted that someone's file included the words Victoria. So if you were interested in, well, who were the people uprooted from Victoria, and what was their situation, as much as can be gleaned from the case files, which have letters from those folks and lists of their property, and you'll get a good sense of the case files in our session coming up. But you can see we have 292 records that mention Victoria. That's not a full search of all the text in the file. It's an indication that that in the metadata that Johanna was talking about, that Victoria appears in the summary that our research assistants made. But the whole file is much longer, and you can click right there and go to a PDF file, and that's going to take a moment to load. But you'll be able to see the actual complete case file. You'll be able to download it and read it, and you can undertake any kind of searches of that kind. It's still downloading over here. If I was looking for a family, I'm going to talk about the Tamura property in Vancouver in a little bit. Then I could enter Tamura, and if I had more specific names, a first name as well, I could enter the first name and narrow that search. And it's recommended to put in these plus signals when you're searching. So in each case, we'll see if this is downloaded, not totally yet. In each case, you can find the materials you're looking for. My own use of the archive right now has been to try and research a topic, which is the exile of Japanese Canadians in 1946. As many of you would know, almost 4,000 Japanese Canadians were exiled in 1946, and I'm working on that topic right now. So I can do a drop down here that you should be able to see on the side, and there's other drop down. Maybe if I was interested in only women's stories or in people of a certain age, I could look that up. So right now I'm working on people who are exiled. So I just enter the full date range here. It's kind of a imperfect search but it does capture everything. Everyone was here was exiled in 1946, and so I found documents, 2,000 case files that represent about 4,000 people who were exiled to Japan in 1946. And then for my own research, I've just wondered to myself, well, I wonder what it would look like to look at some of the long files, you know, because they might have a lot of communications. I might learn a lot about these families that were exiled by looking at some of the more lengthy files. And the files really vary in length and the content that they contain. So I said, well, I just wondered as a first search how many files for exiles are over 100 pages. And I found 21 files. And right now I've been reading through these files, trying to understand the experiences of some of the folks who were exiled. And one of the striking things about those files is if you look at the arrangements that they were making in 1942, and it's clear that these people who would be exiled in 46 anticipated coming back to their homes when they left. And they were one of the files that I read recently. They actually had created a lease, the term of which for the person renting was until the end of the war. That was actually written into the lease. So they had believed the government that they would be able to return. They're very striking and difficult files, as I know family members find as well. Mike had suggested that I also show you another collection. And so, because maybe many folks on the call have seen the case files before. One of the collections I thought I might show is the land title collection. And not all of the records in here come from Library and Archives Canada. So this is a Library and Archives Canada collection. These are oral histories that the project itself collected. These are legal cases, the records of which are in different repositories, and directories are not at LAC. So similarly, the land titles are not from Library and Archives Canada. They're from the British Columbia Land Title and Survey Authority, which was also a partner on the project and allowed us to do title searches for free. Which is a very, they waived a lot of fees to allow us to do that. So again, I could browse those, but I'm going to search instead on one of the really iconic properties in the Powell Street neighborhood. Since we're doing Powell Street Festival tonight, is of course the New World Hotel, or would be known as the Tamura Building earlier. And its first Japanese Canadian owner was Shinkichi Tamura. And so I've done this search before, but if I was just doing it for the first time, I had those plus signs to indicate that the search results must include those. Otherwise, it could be one or the other. So this is, it must include both. And so here I see a title in 1936 rather. And the titles are a little bit difficult to get used to, but they're quite interesting. But they expand beyond the information that just the custodian of enemy property files can tell us. They show us Japanese Canadians purchasing property long before that dispossession, and they can show us what happened to the property after it was taken from Japanese Canadians and sold by the custodian. So they offer a wider time horizon, and some of the other sources do that as well, like oral histories. But here we can see in the language is a little bit strange here, where we have a seller and an owner. That's because that's the owner of the new title on the property. So the owner of the new title on the property in this case is Toru Tamura, and this is a transaction from Shinkichi to his son. Shinkichi was returning to Japan at that time, and you can see that they sold it's a large property already. It was assembled over earlier purchase by Shinkichi, and you can see it's pretty valuable property. The consideration, which is the sale price, is over $75,000 at the time, which they indicate is also the market value. So if I'm interested in tracing this property, I can go down here to a newer title, which means it happened after this transaction. And I jump ahead and I see that the next transaction on this property is in 1943, and it is a seizure of the property by the custodian of enemy property. So this is the custodian asserting its managerial control over this property, and it indicates a consideration of $31,500. So remember that his father sold it to him and I don't know exactly that the money changed hand, but the property had a value of $75,000 in 1936, and here it is selling for $31,500 as the custodian takes control of the property. This title's unusual in certain ways, but now we'll see that in 1943, in just 3 days later, the custodian transfers the property again. So the custodian has acquired it for $3,500, and here's the sale to Giovanni Dorignon for that same amount, but they are indicating a higher market value. So then you can start to assemble that into, if I was tracing a property of my family, or of a, property I'm interested in, I can start to pull that information and I put it into a kind of a tabular form like this, so I can see what's happening over time. So I can see that this fellow who purchased it for $31,500 in 1943 sells it for $100,000 in 1959. And another thing that I tend to do, oh, I'm a little bit over time, but another thing I tend to do is go to the Bank of Canada inflation calculator. The Bank of Canada has this inflation calculator, so I can say, oh, in 1936, a property sold for $31,500. Well, let's go. I might do it this way: $75,500 in 1936, rather. That was its value. So its present value. So the present value there, and this is just not taking into account the very significant rises in the value of real estate in Vancouver, but just taking into account inflation, $1.4 million, right, in 1936. And then when that family received $31,500 in 1943, so and I might put this over in my table, 1.4 million. When they received this amount in 1943, then that was $494,000, the equivalent of $494,000 in 2021 dollars. So that's just a sense of the land title. It may be a somewhat less user-friendly interface, but if you're looking into a property that was in the Powell Street neighborhood in particular, we did 23 square blocks of properties comprehensively in that area for the whole run of all the records we could access, so from about 1914 to 1985. So if you're thinking about a Powell Street area record in particular, I'd encourage you to put in a family member's name and start to dig around. And if you need help, reach out to us and we'll try to help to navigate that together. Thanks, Mike. I went over time, but hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. It's a long weekend. Thank you very much. Fascinating. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So thanks for taking me up on that suggestion. So now, without further ado, I think we're going to go to our family story sharing. And let me just share my screen here first. This takes a bit. Okay, I'm going to do it this way then. All right. See, I needed those extra seconds just to do this, Jordan. So our first speaker is Tami Hirasawa, and she's a sensei from Nanaimo, originally from Hamilton, though. And she's president of the Central Vancouver Island Japanese Canadian Cultural Society, which is known as the Seven Potatoes. But what I'm really excited about this presentation is our families grew up together and really good family friends from way back in Hamilton. And a few years ago, I traveled to Hamilton and Toronto to do some presentations. And I did one at the Hamilton Japanese Cultural Center that I sort of grew up in. And we presented the Hirasawa family, and Joyce was there, and Patty Simpson was there. And they had a book by their uncle, Tami's uncle Goro, who I think is on the call. So thank you very much. And he had really researched it quite a bit. You'll see some of that in her talk. But in the book, in the preface, there's a note from him. And it says, this manuscript focuses primarily on the recollections of the Nisei Hirasawas, that is the second generation family members listed below. But where available, we have included some contributions from the Sansei, but not in as extensive a form. This book is published with the usual copyrights, but interested descendants are invited to expand on this history as time goes on, as new data or inspiration dictates, and to maintain the record for the benefit of future Hirasawas, particularly with regard to their own families. So I thought that this was a really great start to invite her to speak at this talk. So I'll hand it over to Tami. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to say that I'm grateful to be living on the unceded territory of the Sunemu First Nations people. And if you want to pull up my...
Was I sharing at that time when I was talking? I don't think I was. No?
We can't see your screen.
You couldn't see my screen. That's what I was scared. I was afraid of. Okay.
We saw it for a minute.
You saw it for a minute? Okay.
So my father is George Hirasawa, and his family lived in Surrey, BC prior to 1942. And my mother is Yukiko Joyce Fujimagari, and her family lived in Burnaby prior to 1942. Yep, there's the Fujimagari family. So I'm going to start talking about the Fujimagari family. And there's the family, and Fusakichi Fujimagari is my grandfather. He's in the beard there. My mom's standing on the right at the end. Yep. And then the next slide, you'll see that I went into the case files. Yep, so there's his case files, and was looking around, looking through the case files. And it's kind of like, I've been in there a couple of times. Like the first time I kind of just read the story and read through it. You can go to the next slide. I think there's an older picture. Yeah, this is an old picture from like 1926. And that's one of the only pictures I've ever seen of my grandfather without a beard. But that was from when he went to Japan after my grandmother died. Okay, the next slide. So in the case files, this is the house. This is the property that the family owned in Burnaby at 204 Alpha Avenue. And you can see this wonderful two-story building that my grandfather built, and he finished it in 1940. I think it took quite a while to build. And the whole property was about an acre, and it was totally cultivated. Yep, you can see that there's an acre of cultivated land. He had a chicken house that was 16 by 40 and a brooder house that was 12 by 14. This two-story building that had 6 rooms. It had a cement basement, and my grandfather had done an ofuro bathtub down there. And it was kind of amazing that he had a flush toilet. My mom talks about all the neighborhood kids coming over to look at the flush toilet. He also had a lot of flower bulbs. There was like 400 dozen tulip bulbs, 1,200 dozen daffodil bulbs, 25 dozen gladiola bulbs, 80 dozen iris bulbs, and 210 bunches of peony. This was all in the registration in March of 1942, where he had to list all of his belongings. There was a number of fruit trees, and my mom talks about him really enjoying grafting different fruits as a hobby, and a lot of vegetables. So you can go to the next slide. And so one of the main things that I did recently was really look at these handwritten letters to the custodian from my grandfather. And in these letters, this one is talking about the fact that he rented the property, the acre with all these, with the farm, working farm, for $10 a month to a Mr. Dunleavy. And he paid $60 in taxes for the year and also had a water bill. And this letter that he wrote to the custodian is asking, it's in October 1942, and it's from New Denver. And he's asking, he said, it's been like 4 months. And so could you please send me the $10 a month rent because I really need it. So then I looked at some more handwritten letters. And what I really focused on was like looking at where they were written. So the one on the left is from Pitcher Butte, Alberta in October 1945. And the one on the right is from Tabor, Alberta in 1949. It's one of the last, one of the last letters talking about some photographs that had been sent to him. And it was interesting because he had gotten this letter saying that we found this in the storage, we found these photographs and one of them has your name on it. So we're going to send them to you. And he says, okay. And so then they get sent to him. And the letter also said, well, there's a number of unclaimed shrines, kotos, trophies, paperwork and books that were unclaimed. And if no one collects them by June 1948 or something like that, that they're going to be destroyed. So I thought that was really sad about all those things. But he gets these photographs and he says, yeah, there's only 2 photographs that are mine and the rest aren't mine. And I think that they belong to somebody else. So, but he's really looking for these books of his, these Japanese books. And if you could please try and find these books. You can go to the next slide. So I kind of like looked at all of these handwritten letters and then I went and talked to my mom. So it was really kind of helpful to have partial information before talking to my mom. And then I asked my mom about kind of filling in the gaps. So there wasn't anything from Hastings Park, but I knew that she went to Hastings Park in May 1942 and then was in New Denver. There was that letter from October 1942 written from my grandfather. There's that letter from Pitcher Butte from October 1945. And then there was a letter from Tabor, Alberta in 1948. So I want to kind of bring on my mom now and just have her kind of talk a little bit. So if you can give her permission to unmute. I think she's on Patty Simpson's. Hi, Mom. So
Tami?
it was really, are you
Sorry,
there?
Tami, where your mom's under what name?
Patty Simpson? Oh, no, Joyce Hirasawa.
Oh, okay, Joyce. Yeah,
Joyce Hirasawa.
don't see. Oh, there, Joyce. Okay, I was gonna say I don't see Patty.
Okay. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Tami.
Thanks for coming on to this today.
I've been listening all along.
Good. So I want to start with Hastings Park. In the case files, it talks about May 28th. It says that the place is getting vacated tomorrow. And so if we go to the next slide on Hastings Park, do you want to just tell us how you got to Hastings Park?
Well, we walked.
But how did your stuff get there?
Yeah, they sent a truck for our belongings.
The RCMP?
So yeah, so living at Burnaby, my mom was really right next to Confederation Park in Burnaby, which is, I think the library is there right now, the property. But I did look at, it's about 2.7 kilometers to Hastings Park. And so that sounds about right, that you got the orders to leave and then they had you walk over to Hastings Park. Do you want to tell us a little bit about when you were in Hastings Park, like about where you slept and where the boys slept?
She wants to know what you did at Hastings Park, where you stayed.
Oh, what did I do? Well, our meals were all made for us. Well, we just,
Where did you stay? You
well,
were
we
in
had
U
these bunk
section.
beds in the livestock building at Hastings Park. As you see in the picture,
What area?
we put sheets around for privacy. They gave us
And-
bunk beds, metal bunk beds, and we filled the mattresses with straw.
They gave you straw?
Hmm?
Did they give you straw?
Yeah,
So I know you talked about there was one bunk bed for the 4 girls.
no, it's double tiered.
That's a bunk. bed.
Okay.
Yeah, one bunk bed.
And
Well, there
so
was
2 people
4.
slept on top and 2 people slept on the bottom.
Yeah, I was on top, and Annie and I, and Jean and Maggie were on the bottom.
And then Yosh and Tak were like 12 and 14 years old.
Yeah, so they were in a different building, boys' building.
So they were sleeping in a whole different part of the building. And then Fusakichi, like the grandfather and Uncle Jack had just turned 18.
Well, they had been sent to camp before we even moved.
So they were out building roads.
Yeah.
Where? What's the name of the camp?
Huh?
Griffin Lake.
Can't hear you.
Where did,
So
where
then-
what camp?
Oh, they were at Griffin Lake camp.
Mm-hmm. And so then you were in Hastings Park like from May until around September, I think.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And then from there, you went to New Denver.
Yes. And you know, they weren't ready for us. So when we got there, we lived in tents. And interior of BC is cold in September. There's our family.
Yep.
And
And
the
so,
men came down from, well, the ones who were carpenters came down and built these houses. They're 3-room shacks. The center, there's 3 rooms, and the center was the kitchen, and then there's a bedroom on either side.
mm,
We're a big family. You got the whole house with with people who were only a few. They had to share. There's a bedroom on either side and the kitchen in the middle, so they shared the kitchen. But we had the whole house.
Where's the bathrooms?
Oh, it was out.
oh, you had to go outside.
Yeah.
Huh. So then grandfather and Uncle Jack came back and were living there. And then you guys went over to Iron Springs.
Oh, well, we applied for, if you were a big family, you could apply for the sugar beet farms. And we were the first family to leave New Denver. And we ended up in Picture Butte.
So can you tell me about coming in the train when you arrived?
Oh, from Hastings Park?
No, from New Denver to Iron Springs,
Oh, yes.
to the sugar beets.
Yes.
How
We-
did you get to New Denver? Did you go on a train?
Yes. From Hastings Park, we were on a train to New Denver. And you know, the interior BC, it's already cold in September. They weren't ready for us. We were in tents.
And then I remember you telling me that when you went to Iron Springs, that all the farmers were kind of waiting for you. All the
Oh,
sugar beet
yes,
farmers were waiting.
when we got to Iron Springs, we got off the train and we're on the platform, and we were in family groups, and farmers would come, and they would chose which families they wanted.
Yeah, and you said some families had like little babies
Yeah,
and they didn't want those families.
no, they wanted big families with big boys.
So you were in Iron Springs for one season.
Yeah.
Did you have
Mhm.
your own place there?
Well, the farmer supplied a room or a house for us. The first time it was an old granary we lived in.
Is that where the Itos lived?
Yeah,
So the Itos had just moved.
Itos had just moved.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I had to look up where Iron Springs was, and it looks like it's just right outside Pitcher Butte. Iron Springs is the red pin on Google Maps, and then Pitcher Butte is just below that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you stayed for a year at Pitcher Butte, or did you stay for longer?
No, just a year. Then we
Okay.
moved to a farm in Tabor.
Yep. And you were in Tabor for quite a few years.
9 years.
Till 52, I guess.
Mm. On the
Well,
Fiquete.
Oh,
So the case files tell us that you're on the Fiquete farm.
Beckety.
Yep. So the Fiquete. Yep.
Yeah. So we were there. I forget how many years. Then we moved to the,
you said 9.
sorry,
You said 9.
Yeah.
altogether we did.
No, 9 years. You said 12 years, but you were 9 years on Fekete Farm. Then there was another farm.
No, we moved to the Jensens
Yeah.
in Fincastle.
And so you were all doing sugar beets that whole time.
Yeah.
Yep. And then this is the house that you moved to, it looks like in this picture.
Yes, we bought
So
this.
this is
one.
after you finished doing sugar beets.
Yeah.
And then
Now, we had Jean got married.
Jean
and
is the oldest.
boys moved out east, and the 2 girls went into nursing. So
So no one was doing
there
sugar
weren't
beets.
enough of us to do sugar beets anymore. Just Jack and I.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah,
So I want to ask Naomi if she's here. Naomi Mayer.
Didn't check.
So this is my recollection of Tabor. This is when I was I was probably about 4 years old here, and we went out to visit Tabor, and this is my Uncle Jack and
yeah.
all of the family kind of jumping on Uncle Jack. Naomi, I want to ask you what you think about just hearing Bachan's stories.
Well, it's really the only time I get to hear about this because you don't learn anything about this in school. You don't really learn about the Japanese Canadians during the war. So I think it's really valuable to learn about all this here. It's also nice because I get to hear it from my own bachan. So that's kind of special to me.
Good, thanks. So yeah, definitely having the case files really helped, and there's a lot of information. There's a lot of information about the about how he sold. He got offers on his property. The first one was in March 1943 for $475, and then they actually sold it for $2,100. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in the case files. So I'm gonna go pivot to the Hirasawa family next. And this like it was really valuable, like Michael said, to have Uncle Goro's book. So I already knew a lot of information before the case files came out. So this is Takajiro Hirasawa, who's my grandfather. He came over probably around 1907 and he became a naturalized Canadian in 1910. So I went into his files. You can go to the next slide. So this is Uncle Goro's book, and Uncle Goro wrote this book in 2002. And so we had a lot of information. Uncle Goro did a lot of research on the family, and you can go to the next slide. And this is actually from Uncle Goro's book. This is his property in Surrey, one of the properties in Surrey, BC at 325 Sandal Road. This was 20 acres and it was totally cultivated. You can see the strawberry pickers there. They also had these huge chicken farms and everything. But I kind of wanted to talk a little bit. You can go to the next slide. Okay, this is the family when they went to Welling, Alberta. They went directly to Alberta to the sugar beets from their farm in Surrey. And you can go to the next slide. So here's, okay, so here's some interesting things that I learned from the case files. There is over 200 pages of letters that are correspondence between Hirasawa, between my grandfather and the custodian and the security commission and anybody that would listen. He wrote a ton of letters asking for his property. He wrote letters and wrote requests for, can you send me my farm tools? Can you send me furniture? I need all this stuff. And the letters that he got back, you could really hear the racism in the reply to the letters. This one letter on the left says, "It looks to us as if he is just stalling for time and not anxious to pay his account. And we have just about got to the end of ourselves and feel like taking action against him. You can convey this to him as we do not intend to cater to him anymore. He has caused us more trouble than all the other Japanese put together. I do not see why we should comply with all of his requests that he sends us." So I feel like you can actually like hear the tone of voice in these letters, which was pretty valuable. And I also feel like there was this misconception that the Issei's were very complacent and they didn't like do anything, and Shigata Ganai, like it is what it is, we can't do anything about it. But I don't feel like that was the way with my grandfather, because of all these letters that he wrote and all these requests that he made. So this is really valuable coming out of the case files. And then one more thing I want to share real quick, the next slide, is this letter about this accident from my dad. So it says that in September 9th, my son George was seriously injured while driving a team of horses for a threshing outfit. And so he goes on, and you can go to, it's a 3-page letter that he writes talking about this accident that my dad had run over by this horse and wagon, and there was a hospital bill for $95, which was a hospital bill and doctor's bill. And he goes on to say it's not the horse's fault. He knows that these horses are practically wild and they're left out on the range and they're not taken care of, and they're even in sub-zero temperatures. The horses aren't brought indoors, and then when they do get put to work, they work for 12 hours, and it's no wonder that the horses do not do as the driver guides. And then in previous letter, he talks about how my dad wasn't available for sugar beets because he was injured, and then my Auntie Mary had to look after him, so she wasn't able to help on the sugar beets. So it was a real hardship. And I know my dad like did complain about his shoulder, like when he missed his golf swing and things like that. So I know that was a thing, but I didn't realize all the hardship that my grandfather went through with this accident, and all the, and he did do a lot of letters back and forth with the custodian and writing to everybody that he could think of. So I thought that was very valuable coming out of the case files. So I think that that probably is about my time. And I just want to thank my Uncle Goro for doing all the research prior to 2002. And this is a picture of my Uncle Goro graduating from U of T, and that's my grandfather Hirasawa on the right and my grandmother on the left. And there's probably a lot more stories that we could dig up from the case files as well. But I also just want to thank Landscapes of Injustice and the NAJC for allowing me to talk. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Tami. That was really great. And so nice to hear your story, Joyce, and thanks, Patty. And of course, like to have 3 generations and on the call. So thanks very much, Naomi, for adding your perspective. And I see that Goro Hirasawa is on the call too. So thanks very much. That was a really interesting book that I had read. And your preface has come to fruition. So it's great that these records are helping all your generations learn more about your families. So thank you so much, Tami and the Hirasawas, the Fujimagaris on the line. There's many of them. So thanks so much. And I'll now hand it over to my co-host, Lorene, and our next speaker, who
Thank you.
she'll introduce.
Thank you, Mike. And I echo the thank yous to the Hirasawa family. Amazing stories. And as you could say, we could spend hours talking about these stories. So thank you for spending that time researching, and especially the photos, I wanted to say, because that's what fascinates me. And also Surrey girl. I love the photos of Surrey. Because that's one of the things that I'm working with the city of Surrey to let them know that I grew up in Surrey. I didn't even know all the stories in Surrey. Like we talk about going to Strawberry Hills, just as a name as where the theater is and the shopping center is, but not realizing the connection to the Japanese Canadian farmers and all the strawberries that produced around 95% of the strawberries before they were uprooted and interned. The 95% of the strawberries for BC. Amazing. Anyway, I would like to introduce now, and there's another little bit of a connection with Surrey, is Kevin Okabe, who I work with very closely. He is the executive director for the National Association of Japanese Canadians. He's been doing that since 2018, but his connection to the Japanese Canadian community goes a lot further. It's approximately what, 30 years, Kevin? He was one of those young leaders that got involved, and he's kept involved. So thank you, Kevin, for all of your involvement. And I'm going to share the PowerPoint that Kevin has prepared. And that tells a little bit more about his story, and I'll pass it on to Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Lorene, and thank you, Mike. And I'd like to say that I am coming to you from Kananaskis, Alberta, in the Canadian Rockies, which is about 100 kilometers southwest of Calgary. And I acknowledge that I'm situated on Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territories of the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. Now, for me, I've always considered myself Yonsei. If you just go back one slide there. That would be, I guess, technically from a generational perspective, but technically, I think the right way, if you go by the father's side and the grandfather's side, would be Sansei, and then recently, I think Michael Abe's daughter indicated that, well, you should talk about your Nisei side too, because that's part of your family. And my mother came from Japan. So I'm kind of a mixed collection of things, multi-generational anyways. But yeah, it's been a long time since I've become involved with the NAJC and the Japanese community. And as a result of that involvement, I've become quite aware of my own history. So if you can go to the next slide. I wasn't involved too much in the community actually prior to my end of high school, I guess, in 1985. It was just a project that I was doing with the school project, and my dad happened to mention about the relocation and coming into St. Pierre and a little bit of the history that I first became aware of everything. Of course, in 1985, I was in Winnipeg, and obviously redress movement was just really gaining ground at that point. So I was invited to join the Manitoba Redress Committee, and really got involved at a very exciting time for redress. The press releases were coming out and the government negotiations were occurring, and obviously within 3 short years after that, the settlement occurred. So that was a really exciting time to get involved with the community, and to see all that stuff happen firsthand was a truly memorable experience. Okay, the next slide. So if we look at the history, and I think one of the things that I am realizing with this historical discussion with different families, especially the one that we just had, is that everyone seems to, on the surface, have a similar story. They were from the BC coast, moved out somewhere and got relocated, lost all their property. But when you get into the detail of each of the stories, there's very unique aspects. And that's what's really intriguing about all this, is each path becomes a different life, and each story, there's tons of hidden stories underneath the surface. And so as I became interested in my own family history and starting to put the pieces together, it was quite an evolution. And there's still an ongoing set of mysteries, I think, within the timeline that I still need to be looking at. But in a nutshell, I think the family history essentially begins with the arrival of Kamakichi Nagasaka, who arrived in 1907. Now, apparently he had arrived after an older brother had come in Canada and purchased some land, but had to return to Japan. And so he came across with his younger brother in 1907 to take over that property. And I think they were doing fishing at that time. In 1915, Shizu, my great-grandmother, came over and married Kamakichi. And together they would have 7 children, which one of them was my grandmother, Yoshie. They wind up having a farm, a fairly large farm apparently, in Strawberry Hill, in the Surrey area. And as a result of the farm, and I just trying to piece this part together, but apparently the younger brother had died of some kind of a shotgun blast to the throat for some reason. And that was around the 1920s. So then my grandfather would come in 1924 to help on the farm. My grandfather, Kenji Okabe, was a family friend in Japan. And so he did immigrate in 1924 to help out on the farm. If you go to the next slide. And the family was quite interested in photography, so there was probably about 300 or 400 photos altogether in one of the Nagasaka family albums. And so I was fortunate enough to have some really good photographic evidence of both my great-grandparents on the left, my great-grandfather and my grandmother on the right, and then the farm that they had in Strawberry Hill. And I understand that on the lower right is the relatively newly constructed chicken house, I believe, that was on the property. And I think on the left is a picture of strawberries being grown on the farm. Okay, and next slide. So about 10 years after Kenji arrived, Kenji did wind up marrying Yoshie Nagasaka. And they would go on to have 2 children, including my father, Kunio, and my aunt, Itsue. In 1942, along with all the other families in the Japanese-Canadian history part of it, we wound up being so-called evacuated. And as a family unit, apparently we were all moved to the sugar beet farms located just south of Winnipeg, a place called Carey and St. Pierre, Manitoba. Now, the one thing that I know in sharing some of the landscapes of injustices documents with my dad's cousins, one of them surprisingly said that it looked like everyone moved to different areas of Manitoba because there's different locations identified in the documents. So I'll have to go back and take a look at that closely, because my assumption was that the family was moved together, but apparently there was references to other cities that I need to look at. But I know for my father, he was actually in the Carey, St. Pierre area, as well as the Okabe family. Now, given that he had lost the farm and was not able to return to that in 1946, my grandfather did decide to return to Japan. They were located in Aichiken, in Hekinan, sort of an area outside of Nagoya. And I guess the family, there was a large family there, and they needed some support. So the grandfather decided that since he couldn't go back to Vancouver, he decided that he needed to go back to Japan. And I guess he would be considered one of those exiles. So in fact, obviously, because he went to Japan, my grandmother, my aunt, and my father all had to go with him. And all three of those were born in Canada. My aunt was 3 years old, I believe, at the time, and has been obviously in Japan ever since. And in fact, my father would be the only one that would return to Canada in 1956. Apparently, he did have the blessing of the family to do that. And he was accompanied by my great-grandfather, Kamakichi. And I think I even recall seeing the plane ticket coming back from Japan, and it was $800 back in 1956. So it was not a cheap flight back. But he would come back to Winnipeg and settle with one of his uncles, George Nagasaka, and remain in Canada ever since. Okay, on to the next slide. So there's some pictures of this era. Obviously, the shacks in the Carey, Manitoba, which was home to the family. I guess the family sugar beet photos in there. And then on the middle there is my grandfather, grandmother, and my dad and my aunt. On the left is when my dad returned to Canada. I guess that's just outside the Nagasaka family home. And in 1966, he actually did marry my mother, Satomi, in Japan. That'd be probably the only time he'd go back to Japan until he retired, actually, to marry my mother. And apparently they didn't really see each other before the wedding, but they were, I guess my mother's family was close friends with my father's family in Japan, and so they sort of arranged marriage, I guess. But yeah, that was back in 1966. Okay, next slide. So in terms of locating these family files, when I was able to get access to this, I was always anticipating this. There's been an extraordinary amount of information I knew was in those files, but when I did share them with the family, it actually did initiate another dialogue. I've had on and off conversations with the Nagasaka family over the years to get various glimpses of the history and trying to piece some of the photos and the stories and some of the artifacts that came up. But this really restarted that dialogue, and it's with the volume of documents that have gone forward, it's really surprising to the family. And I believe that I hope that this will be a start of an ongoing dialogue where we delve into our history together, bring our stories together from a pretty widespread family, and hopefully we can piece that history that has been there for all this time. So definitely the volume of data, I think we've got about, the Nagasaka side has probably over 100 pages, and then the Okabe side is a little bit less than that, but so there's quite a bit of information there. And I think in reviewing that information, I think the one thing that I find was very valuable was that it did provide very specific dates for our timeline. So a lot of times it was kind of, around this time or whatever, but now we have a good picture of what happened when. And by going through that, it was really helpful to establish that. So then a lot of other things, it gives you a bit of a frame of reference. So for example, my great-grandfather was here for about 30 years before he lost his land. So in that time, he managed to build up quite a farm. And then to lose that all was probably a tremendous shock. And the amount of time that my grandfather spent in Canada was also quite surprising to me. So he was here for about over 20 years.
Oh, Kevin, your sound, you cut out there now.
What?
Oh, sorry, you sound cut out there for the last bit about. You're talking about
So I do hope that the family, this will reawaken that interest in exploring the history. A lot of them are retired now, and it would be good to gather the stories that, obviously all the main people that were involved with the experience are now passed on, except for one, my aunt. But it'd be nice to reinitiate that dialogue and collect the stories that are still in the heads of the descendants anyways. Right, on to the next one. So that across the top, I know it's purposely not visible, but that's kind of our family tree in Canada. A couple years back, we managed to kind of complete that. And it goes for, we're now into the 5th generation in Canada. And it's quite extensive. A lot of people, 2 of the brothers from the Nagasaka family did go east towards Schreiber, Toronto, and Windsor. 2 of them remained in Winnipeg, and 1 did go back to Vancouver. And then obviously a lot of them had sons and daughters, so that's that picture across the top. So I think we have a pretty complete picture of the family tree in Canada. A couple of years ago, I did decide to try to dig out what I could from Japan. And with the benefit of obviously my aunt, who is still alive and in Japan, even though she was born in Canada. She's been there since she was 3 years old. So Japan's basically been her home. But she still lives in the area of her ancestral upbringing. In fact, the street that the Okabes live on in Japan there's still Okabes living on there. So on the left, there's the gravesite of the Nagasaka family in Hekinan, Japan. And this grave was built by the father of my great-grandfather, apparently, according to the inscription there. So it goes back quite a long ways. And obviously, the Nagasaka and the Okabe families that are still there, that are buried, are in the same cemetery. On the right-hand side is a copy of the Koseki document that was first provided to me by one of the Nagasaka relatives. It's all handwritten at the time, so it must have been brought over from Japan. And it lists all the family. The Koseki is effectively a record of your family, obviously in Japan. And so that's kind of helped us piece a little bit of the family tree together there. The middle one was something that was brought to my attention by a relative that I did share the landscapes information with, and she was able to dig up this marriage certificate of my grandfather out of the BC archives. So it's the first time I've seen that. And obviously there's another piece of the puzzle being added there. And then the top right is the mon, or the family crest, for the Nagasaka family. I have the Okabe family one somewhere, but I don't know where that is. All right, on to the next one. So what we learned from the digital archives database, well, we've perused it. We haven't gotten through a lot of the details because there's so much information in there, but as we indicated, the dates and the chronologies, there's a lot of places and locations. Obviously names and relationships are all identified in there. And for me, when I was looking at the very extensive list of equipment and the floor plan and the descriptions, it really gave me a sense as to what the farm must have looked like for the first time. So the sheer size of it and the amount of stuff, the detail of what was actually in it was tremendously important, helping give me that visual picture anyways. If you go to the next slide, I think there's some elements of that there. Yeah, so if you see, let's see, on the left side, it's kind of hard to see, is kind of a diagram that was in the documents of the farm itself. And then one of the things I did look at was the right side is the signature of the lawyer that was acting on behalf of the Nagasaka family in the Burke Commission proceedings, I believe. And it looked like it was S.M. Cherniak. And when I grew up in Manitoba, that was a very prominent name as a politician, I believe. And when I looked at this, I believe that's the same person, that this lawyer was at that time that was defending our family's case, became this very prominent lawyer and politician in Manitoba in I think the 70s or something like that. Very famous name anyway, so I thought that was quite interesting. Right, the next slide. The other thing that I did find was very interesting was this letter in the name of my grandfather, but I believe the writing is actually my grandmother's writing, indicating that he did not wish to sell his property. So, you know, clearly he was fully intending to remain in Canada, wanting to raise his family here, and to then lose all of his property and his farmland was probably very devastating to him. So the signature on the bottom is really looks like an Okabe, the grandmother Okabe signature there, but clearly I think the intention was quite clear that he did not want that stuff sold. All right, on to the next slide. So I guess with all the documentation that's been presented, the magnitude of the loss is really become apparent, and I can see that how this could become a sensitive issue for some families to realize that what they built up over all these years was lost just like that. It is quite outstanding, and in our family, we didn't really talk. There wasn't a lot of talk about that history of it. Like, you know, our family and Nagasaka family tend to be on the happy side, I think, and looking at that side of life. And so, even though there's tremendous hardships, I think that they experienced through that. I think that part of it was never apparent in any of the family discussions. But for my grandfather to have to return to Japan with virtually nothing, I think it had to be really difficult for him. And I know for my father, I know Japan was difficult for him. He was 10 years old when he went to Japan. He had to start school in grade 1 again. He had no language. I think he told me he wore shoes to school, and that was a strap-in offense, and he had to study all the time at night and all that. So it wasn't a very easy time for him. But when he returned to Canada when he was 21, I believe, he really didn't want to go to Japan to visit for a very long time, even to talk to his parents or writing letters. All that happened with my mom. And I think probably whatever happened in Japan when he went through that experience was probably something that was difficult for him. But, you know, I think with my aunt, it was a bit different. She was young when she went there, and so she's now has her own family there, and she took care of our grandmother. My grandmother still remained there until her death. Yeah, so in some ways, it was nice to have that connection to Japan, though, because at least allowed us to connect to our families in Japan, but clearly it was a difficult experience for those involved. Right, next slide. I just wanted to mention that like we've been lucky as a family that a lot of pictures were taken, and for Kenro Nagasaka especially, who was, I believe, the photographer, he did write extensive notes on the back of most of the pictures with dates and names and places, and some interesting comments for some of those pictures. But that was very helpful, at least documenting some of those places that he visited and what he took pictures of, which was including pre-war, post-war, in the Manitoba days, and then even on to his days going into Ontario. We are also fortunate that Michael Hoshiko documented the pioneering Japanese families in Delta and Surrey. So there's a good write-up of both the Nagasaka and Okabe families in there. And then the Nikkei National Museum, in a couple of instances, provided me with some great leads, including a recording from one of the Nagasaka family, like the oldest siblings, I guess, of the Kamakichi, which talked for about 3 hours about the history, and no one was really aware of this recording. So they had that, and I know Pat, I think she's still on here. She has been very helpful in sending tidbits of information, especially with my family references on them from her research in the archives. So there's a lot of information being gathered by different people, and whether they're shared across or not, I'm hoping that we'll try to do that with the Nagasaka family, because to bring it all together into one collection and to develop this collective history is a tremendous opportunity, I think, that we have, and hopefully this landscape's contribution and access to these files is going to stimulate that discussion. All right, just to conclude, next slide. there's some of the references that I came across or was mentioned to me. So, definitely go to those sites and try to see if you have any family history located in any of those. You might be quite surprised. All right, and at the very end, one more slide, I think. Yes, so, oops, just one back. So just a discussion about what made our family kind of unique was 5 Canadian-born members of our family actually wound up moving to Japan. There was one of my grandmother's sister was actually in the 1920s, I think. They went on a family trip to Japan, and they left her there as a 7-year-old to kind of take care of the family in Japan. Apparently she was not very happy about that, but she stayed in Japan. And when my grandmother was back in Japan, they were neighbors at that time. So that was one of our generation that moved to Japan before the war. Obviously, my grandmother and my aunt and my dad moved there after the war as part of the exile group, I guess. And then my sister is now living in Japan permanently. So a lot of us have now moved back to Japan. On the other side of things, of the Nisei generation here, 4 of them would actually marry people from Japan. The Sansei generation, we had 2 people coming from Japan that married into the family. And of the Yonsei generation, I guess just my brother and myself, we'd also be, our wives are also from Japan. So we've maintained a unique connection to Japan in this way, and it's been helpful. We never did really learn a lot of Japanese ourselves, so having this connection to Japan or with the Japanese language has been really helpful exploring the our generations in Japan. When we covered the generations in Canada, we did go back a little bit in Japan, and we were able to go back about another 3 generations ahead of my great-grandfather. So it wasn't like, it doesn't look like it's a samurai thing or whatever, because we don't have a long lineage, but there was an ability to go back at least another 3 generations through the Koseki records and the funeral records. So that was kind of neat to build that part of the tree. All right, and I think that's about it. So it's been an exploration of my family history over 30 years that I've been starting to compile together as I have more time to do that. But clearly this landscapes material and having that accessible to the rest of the family is going to probably generate a lot more discussion and interest. And I'm really excited about that part of it. And hopefully that will also bring the Nagasaka family a little bit closer together too, because I know when they've, because they're geographically spread out over the country, there hasn't been a lot of cross dialogue, but I'm hoping that this will stimulate some of that. And ideally, maybe some of them will come to Japan and see the family grave for themselves. But I'd like to thank the project and the archives for making this information accessible to us. There's just so much in there that would be useful to explore.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Lots of wonderful information that came up from your research and the Landscapes of Injustice database. And I can see we're going to need a follow-up, find out more and more about your family and their discussions. I do want to thank everyone for attending this event. My co-host, project manager, Michael Abe for Landscapes of Injustice, Jordan Stanger-Ross, Johanna Smith, thank you so much. And our 2 storytellers, Tami and Kevin, thank you for this wonderful sharing of your stories and photos. Now we will stay on, as promised, we're wrapping up now because we promised you 1.5 hours, but if there are folks that want to stay on, Mike and I talked and we said we're willing to stay on if anyone else wants to stay on for maybe another 15 minutes. And if you have any questions, comments, or you want to share your family story, we're willing to do that. But we made a commitment. So for those of you that have other events or things you have to do tonight, we won't hold you. We do want to thank you so much. We have recorded this session. It will be posted on the National Association of Japanese Canadians website So you can go there, and then we'll also have the link to the Landscapes of Injustice database for sure. And some of the other links that we talked about will be there, so you can obtain that information. But again, thank you so much. And from wherever you are calling us, whether Japan or across Canada, please take care of yourselves, be safe, and stay tuned. Make sure you check out the NAJC website, najc.ca. You can go to the website to also find out about other of our online events that we have. Some of our events are actually in Japanese too. So we post on there, so you can find out about different events. And for sure, when we do the next Landscapes of Injustice database family sharing, we will have that up there as well. So please join us there. I think I covered that all. So as I said, if you want to stay on, we're going to stay on for about another 15 minutes. And for those of you that have to leave, thank you so much. Good evening.
Yeah, thank you very much for those who have to leave. But we do already have a question from Joyce to Johanna. So please do stay on if you can. And there's a question here, Johanna. It's from Joyce Hirasawa. You said that the records were microfilm, but are the originals still available? Oh, can you you have to unmute?
Hang on, sorry. There. And if anyone doesn't want to speak their question, you can write it in the chat and we'll read it out for you.
Yeah, what I'll do is double check that. And Jordan, you may even know this better than I do. Sometimes the department was the original microfilmer of the records and they didn't keep the originals within our government records.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so I think the only materials in the case files that still exists in paper form is the hearings of the Bird Commission, which in some files is a significant share of the material. And you'll notice that the quality there, if you're looking at your case file and you see all of a sudden you get to the Bird Commission and it's a really different quality, that's because those were just recently digitized by Library and Archives Canada. The Bird Commission section rather. So actually the one inside the case file will be the case file quality, I guess, but because they copy them. But then you can go to the case file separately in that separate collection, and I can show that if we want. But the custodian case files themselves were destroyed in 1952, I believe, when they closed down that office.
it was often the case. It happened with many census records as well, where StatsCan would microfilm and not keep all of the paper necessarily. Some of the microfilm is better quality than others in those early microfilms as well. I know, Joyce, you're interested in the photos, and that would be, if there were photos associated with the case files, those would still be microfilm. But I know, Jordan, you have pieces from other archives as well in the database that may be originals.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then there's a comment. Masaya Tanaka says that it was, thank you, organizers, storytellers, very interesting, informative session, and says that Sansei, whose parents were from Alberta, but were not displaced from BC during the war. So just wanted to share that information. And then, and Tammy was asking, Uncle Goro, have you looked through the digital archives? So a question for Uncle Goro. And then Tammy's got a question. How do we report spelling errors in the titles?
So there we are able to in the data in the digital archive, when there are spelling errors in the summaries that our research assistants have created, we will have, I think we've decided like once or twice at the end of this fiscal year, we'll do a refresh. So we're collecting those instances, and I've got through our website, we've got through info@landscapesofinjustice.com. People have sent, maybe a dozen people have sent instances where there are some errors. But you have to remember that these errors are pulled directly from what's in the case file. And the case file, often because of the way spelling is in Japanese and also archaic Japanese versus more modern Japanese, it wasn't our research assistants' duty to see what was correct or incorrect. So they've just pulled that directly. And so if a family member now says, oh, that Suzuki with an X instead of a Z should be with a Z, then we'll put in brackets that it's Suzuki with a Z, not an X, so that possibly, is this right, Jordan, that it'll be now searchable on that new form if it's in that summary area?
Yeah, if it's in the metadata, it would be searchable. But I think, as Mike's suggesting, we're going to leave the original titles of the files themselves as they are, because a researcher might, for instance, go to Library and Archives Canada and find a finding aid and learn that, okay, it's digitally available, but they'd be using that government spelling of the name. And then if they came to the database, they wouldn't be able to find it because they're using a corrected spelling. So the errors that the government made are part of the insensitivity of the government to the community at that time, and that's reflected in the documents in ways that also give evidence to that. But in our own metadata documentation, we can note corrections, as Mike suggested.
Yeah, and some of the summaries you will see that we'll see in brackets also appears as so in your case for your mother Yukiko, but it's listed as Yakiko. So in the metadata in the summary, it'll say Yakiko, but in brackets we will now put may correctly be Yukiko, sort of thing, because we've got that confirmation from family. And now through that metadata, you'll be able to find Yukiko.
Great. That's good information to know. So Ken Richardson says that he visited the New Denver Internment Museum and got a list of all the names of those interned and was surprised that the Fujimagari family was not listed. When I heard Auntie Joyce say they were the first family to leave the internment camp, that might explain why the family is not on the list.
Yeah, there is a list and there's a map of some of the families, but yeah, when was that snapshot taken? And if you only were there for a year, yeah, you may have. And plus, I think part of that was even intense, as you said. So they might have been in pop-up for a little while, intense, and then gone to New Denver. So
the case file would show that, Ken. So if you look at the case file on one of the very first pages, they indicate date of uprooting from coastal BC and the location where they were interned. So in that case, it may indicate New Denver on one of those covering sheets.
Great. There you go. More information for you, Ken. Oh, and then Joyce is saying, did you see Dad's picture there? His beard makes him recognizable. Yoshi Yamaguchi says to everyone, thank you very much for all histories and information.
And have you looked in your information, Yoshi?
I don't know if Yoshi's still on.
Yeah, well, that's true. But just type in if you see your name.
Did Uncle Goro have a comment?
He didn't respond. It was yeah, he didn't respond. Oh, your question about has he looked through the digital archives? I don't see Uncle Goro's response.
Do you want to unmute yourself?
Can you unmute him, or do we unmute?
Oh, hang on. Let me find Uncle
Thanks,
Goro.
Lorene. Goro Hirasawa.
Yeah, I saw him. I just have to scroll. There he is. Okay. Okay, I'm unmuting you, Uncle Goro. I hope you don't mind. I'm calling you Uncle Goro. Once I start hearing Bay Farm pop off, I start feeling like my family. I feel like we're all family. We're all connected. Uncle Goro, you should be unmuted now.
Yeah, okay. No, this is the first I've really heard about the archives. And I thank everybody for the opportunity to spread the word about what happened to the Japanese in the old days. I appreciate that very much.
Well, and thank you for your contribution, all that research you did to put together that book, and not only valuable for your family, but very interesting to all of us, because that's part of the history, Canadian history.
So, and Goro, you had some photos in your book that were from the Bird Commission. Did you go to the Library Archives, the National Archives, in person, or did you order some files from them? when you
I
did
did not.
research?
I did not.
Well, then you must have had those photos yourself then, the ones with the
Or the
farm.
family did. I don't know. That was so
Those-
long
those- Some
ago.
of those pictures appear in the files, you'll see. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that one on the left there from Tami, the house, that appears in one of your records. There's some really great photos in
Oh,
your case files. So you should look
Tammy showing the book, the photos in the
Yeah.
book.
that one. And
So,
then there's one with the
Goro,
rows
you
of
had-
strawberries. Yeah.
Yeah, but Goro, you had the photos, right? You just had them in your possession?
Yeah, he just had them, his own, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The Bird Commission submissions, right? The Bird Commission is that commission after initiated in 1947, in which Japanese Canadians brought claims against the custodian of enemy property for their losses. And so those photos that are included in the Bird Commission claim are largely the photos of Japanese Canadians, families of their properties, to make an argument that the property was perhaps misrepresented in the government's handling of it in the first instance. So it's really neat to pair up the family version of it with the submission copy.
Here's Takejiro Hirasawa's Bird Commission file with the transcript.
Transcript of the
Transcript is really, yeah, the transcript is really interesting. They at one point they say, like, could the interpreter please tell Mr. Hirasawa just to answer the question yes or no and not to give a speech? Like, they really kind of suppressed like his answers when they asked him about, like, did you own this property from 1911, and what did it look like before, and like the fact that the person that rented the place like took off and they threw out all kinds of books and mattresses and stuff out the window, and they told them to burn it. And Hirasawa was trying to get his farm equipment and his scale to be transferred to Alberta, and they said no, the person needs it to run the farm. And the guy said, well, and then Hirasawa was saying, like, well, then he needs to rent his own equipment because we need that equipment. It belongs to me.
Yeah, and we put out our research coordinator, Caitlin Finley. She put together a bird commissioning context document that we usually send out when we were sending these out to people before the database was available. And we posted it actually on our website as well. It's very valuable in explaining things like that the terms of reference were very narrow, and how the people were suppressed and how they could respond during the hearings as well, and they were told to do that and stuff. So yeah, lots more things going on behind the scenes on these files. Yeah.
I really related to, I think, Tammy's presentation when you said that there was this tone of this racist tone, and what was really telling for me is, like, not only to look at documents, but Linda Ohama, famous filmmaker, she did a play about her grandfather, and she actually did a reenactment. So actors took on the roles, and they used the actual Bird Commission, the transcript of it, but the actors took on that. And when you actually see people saying those words to her grandfather, I said to her, I was like almost out of my seat yelling, "That's so unfair. How could you do that?" Right? It's really infuriating.
And to add to that, Lorene, they did that play right in the boathouse.
Yes.
So when they talked about they were arguing that no, they put them in the rafters, they didn't hide them, and you could actually look at the rafters.
Yes.
And so that they weren't hiding them, they were just storing them or underneath.
That was a good
right
point.
in that boathouse. It was like, it was magical. That
Yeah, that was a good point. So,
incredibly well done.
yeah, so part of what Mike's referring to is there was just something simply where they were storing safely whatever. They put it there, and that's what that lawyer was accusing him. So you hid them then, and right? It's like, no, we were just storing them there, and that's just right. But everything was twisted. It was twisted to make them look
Yeah.
like they were bad. They didn't deserve their own property that was taken from them.
And they also talked about that, how that was translated or not translated. You know, there's a bit of bias in how it was translated for those who needed a translator.
Yes, definitely. And I have to thank Tami and Kevin because part of their stories helped me. I did an event documenting the stories of Japanese Canadians in Surrey, because this is my big, because I live in Surrey, so that's my big push to get the city to take on more of documenting the history of Japanese Canadians. And Tami, thank you so much. And Kevin, because your stories and the photos just added so much more to that event of really breathing life into it. These just aren't names on a paper. It's not just numbers. These are living, breathing souls with families, you know, that were hurt, that were challenged, that struggled, that survived, that built, that did all these amazing things. So don't dismiss them. Don't make them invisible. Like, let's make it visible, that whole history. So a little surprise here, you know how I said that I feel like we're all family? So George Nakamura is saying to Kevin, I think we're related. My aunt was Shigeko Kobayashi, married Mas Nagasaka. I'm Alice Kobayashi Nakamura and live near Toronto. Lost family, maybe?
I have some family on here too. Donna, hi.
I know it's just so amazing. I won't put you on the spot, but so amazing sometimes, just so much of our connections. And like most of us, our families didn't talk about it. So I grew up, I never knew all the stories. And then as I became an adult and older, and then I started to hear more stories, and then you start going, oh, and then I start to think like you know, like our elders, right? It's like, oh, I'm starting to associate between camps. Oh, your family was in Bay Fon Papa or New Denver or Lemon Creek or Tashme, or and there's all these connections.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. I don't want to hold everyone up. It's a long weekend coming up, but I do want to thank everyone. I want a special thanks to Lorene and NAJC, Johanna from the Library Archives Canada, and our speakers, Tami and her family, Patty, Joyce, and Naomi. And thank you so much, Kevin and Jordan, and especially everyone who were on the call listening. So thank you so much. Any last words from anyone else? And yeah, I think
we'll do it again.
Yeah, we will.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye now.
Good night.
Night.